Andy Roberts has been a very busy musician for a very long time. What began as trips to musical theatre with his dad and the proms with his mother grew into a lifelong passion that encompassed many genres and variety of music. From solo albums, playing with iconic bands, to theatrical, TV and films, Andy has done it all, often at the same time. From the proms with his mother, where he decided he wanted to play the violin because it was the busiest instrument, which led him to winning a scholarship at 9 years old to Felsted School in Essex, where he also played in school bands. In 1963 and 1964, he was part of the Edinburgh Rehearsal Orchestra that took him to the festival for 2 years running, during which he managed to fall in love with Indian music, courtesy of Ravi Shankar and others. The call for help from the brother of a school friend that led him to going up again in 1964 to play at the Traverse Theatre, where he met the Scaffold, Viv Stanshall and many more that would soon to become very important to this young man. In 1965, he started a course to study law at Liverpool University, and on the very first day bumped into Roger McGough in a bookshop. This led to everything else as he appeared on the Scaffold's #1 hit Lily the Pink, and meetings with many Liverpool poets, which in turn led to him becoming part of the iconic band The Liverpool Scene, with Adrian, Henri and Brian Patton amongst many others. As well as playing with the Liverpool Scene, he was also working at the Everyman Theatre and making his first solo album. He worked quite a lot with versions of the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, including Viv Stanshall and Neil Innes. He was a founder member of Grimm's. He toured the US with Iain Matthews of Matthews Southern Comfort and Richard Thompson, who he roomed with during that tour. Returning, he formed Plainsong with Iain, which lasted a year in those early days. He played a newly invented instrument, Paul Krivaczeck, called the string organ, and even played a solo with it on a Teaser and the Firecat album by Cat Stevens, which lay uncredited for 40 years. He played guitars on the Pink Floyd live version of The Wall, at least in the 1981 dates, and appears in places on the album. He's also played regularly with Roy Harper and Hank Wangford. He's provided music for Spitting Image and acted on Rutland Weekend Television. One of his first major plays was Cloud 9 by Carol Churchill, directed by Max Stafford Clark, where Andy wrote both the score and the lyrics. The play was an exploration of sexual politics and was staged all around the world to this day. A whole series of TV and theatre work followed, some of it award-winning. He worked with Antonia Bird on plays like Oh for England, Priest, Safe and Bent. He wrote music for episodes of programmes as diverse as Bergerac and Z-Cars. He was and is a very busy man, and even the following 2 hours and 20 minutes does little to encompass much of his work. But you have to start somewhere.
It's been sort of, for me, it's just follow your nose. One thing begets another, you know.
I believe you.
Yeah,
everything I've
the
read.
biblical thing.
Yes.
But always have something to do. Don't sit at home doing nothing, you know, just if an opportunity presents itself, take it. And I was handed on a plate by Adrian the chance to be in my favourite place, which is 3 feet to the left of and 1 foot behind the guy in the spotlight, who is brilliant.
Of all the none has played in modern history than London, mother city of the British Empire. An immense metropolis of some 700 square miles, with a population of 8 million, it has survived invasions by Romans and Saxons, Danes and Normans in the 4,000-odd years since it was founded. Today, battered but indomitable, London is still in the process of recovering from the greatest ordeal of its long history.
I am talking to you today because I want to ask you all to help in making this country of ours more prosperous.
For folks like me in the bakery business, bread rationing started with a big question mark. We didn't like it, and here we are saying so.
Welcome to your kitchen.
Thank you. You're welcome to my kitchen as well, Nick.
Thank you, sir. You were born in Hatch End, which is a marvellous place. I mean, I lived there, and
I mean, it's fair to say that I don't remember being born, but, you know.
No.
I know Headstone Lane, Hatch End, which is where I was born. Born in a cottage hospital, which is no longer there. It's now a block of flats. But my mum was put there, I don't know, under what circumstances, I don't know, just after the war.
What did your parents actually do? Did they both work?
Yes, for my entire life. My dad was in the Navy, and when he came out of the Navy in 1945 or early 46, he went to work for the post office. In their head office, he was a solicitor. And he worked in the legal department for the post office when it was a public corporation, so he was basically part of the civil service. And he spent his life very unglamorously prosecuting bent postmasters. That was his gig, and he did very well at it, and, you know, retired on a big fat index-linked pension, and that was his life. And he was not, I think, in that sense, ambitious in the way that I and my brother both have been, I think.
Explains why you took a career in law.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Well, you didn't, did you, in the end? But
well, I didn't progress with it. I did qualify. In the sense, I got a university degree. I have an LLB, which is a Bachelor of Laws from Liverpool.
Was your father ever frustrated that you didn't pursue?
My parents were both. I think my mum was secretly really chuffed that I did what I did, because she always lent that way. She was quite artistic, but she was a very remarkable woman in many ways. She also worked. She had been, in her youth, a high flyer. She was a secretarial grade type person. She worked at the Foreign Office, and then she got recruited to be Stanley Baldwin's personal secretary. And she worked at number 10 through the abdication crisis in 1936. So she knows everything about, or knew everything, she's forgotten now, she knew everything about that. But unfortunately, and she was very sporting. She won trophies. There are silver cups upstairs, you know, Foreign Office tennis trophy, 1935, Miss Kane, you know, Hans Kane was her surname. But then she had an absolute disaster. She caught polio in her mid-20s, she was 26, 27. And was very impaired by it, and so it took her a long time to recover any kind of mobility in her right side. And she had some pioneering surgery, and she met my dad on a train, I think 10 days before he went off to war, and they married after 10 days, and he went off to war very soon after. My brother was born before the war, or before his war, and I was born after it. But he was away in the Navy for the best part of 5 years and never came back. He was in the Mediterranean and he never made it back. So she was at home looking after my brother through that. But then what happened afterwards, once I was back, my earliest memories are not really of the family as a family. I don't really have any recollection of that. We'd have holidays together and things like that. But my mum worked from the earliest days. I was brought up by a housekeeper who was called Mrs. Wakerley, who I loved very dearly. An oldish lady. And my mum was, for a long time, the head of filing, I remember that, at the Institute of Electrical Engineers, which is on the Strand. It's a big building next to Shellmack's house, which is now the headquarters of Penguin, but for then it was the headquarters of Shell Oil. And head of filing. So in those days, when it was typing and carbon paper, and everything was in quadruplicate and all the rest of it, and you kept one copy in the filing department, and she was very good at that. She was very organised at that sort of thing.
Did your mum play an instrument?
No, well, she couldn't play anything because of her polio. She had played piano. She liked music. She just doted on the musical side of my growing up. I mean,
she took you to the Promenade concerts, didn't she, regularly?
Yeah.
And what really struck me was that you asked to play the violin, or for lessons to play the violin.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that was partly because you were in love with it, or because you wanted to please your mother as well. Or...
No sense of pleasing my mum. I was pleasing myself. But what it was that because of the experience of her taking me to the proms, and it was not fancy, let's buy 2 Swiss seats and go to the proms. It was spur of the moment stuff, and which is what's wonderful about the proms, and Sal and I did it, and I've instilled it in my children as well. It is the most wonderful season, proms. And you can go on a whim, on the day, decide, let's go to the proms. And she would take me, and we'd sit in the gallery, which is then and now is the cheapest possible way of promenading. We would take a blanket and sit on the floor on the blanket and listen to wonderful stuff. And I'd press my head up against the stone balustrade and peer through. And I just figured out that the violins had the most to do, basically. I mean, any orchestral piece, mostly it's, the fiddles play throughout. Sometimes, you'll have a feature for the wind or the brass or percussion and whatever else you have. And obviously there are soloists, but the spine, the backbone of the music was just masses of fiddles scraping away, and I just thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be one of them because they're the busiest, they're doing it all. So I asked to play violin, and I started having lessons at the age of 9.
And you won a scholarship, of course, to Felton School.
Felstead.
Sorry?
Felton is in Middlesex. Felstead
yes, I know Felton better.
Is in darkest Essex. Yeah.
But of course, you didn't escape the influence of your dad with the Crazy Gang, did you? And
No.
I love the fact that eventually the music from your mum, if you like, and the comedy from your dad kind of merged into you in some.
Well, I think they both like that stuff. I mean, yeah, it's true. My dad was he loved music hall. That was his thing. It was very much on its last legs by the time I, at the age of sort of 9, 10, 11, was being taken to see things by him. But he really adored that stuff. But even family outings, I was taken to see At the Drop of a Hat, which was Flanders and Swan. I was taken to see Salad Days. I was taken to see the original production of My Fair Lady with Julie Andrews and Stanley Holloway, and all of that. I mean, it was just, they loved musicals as well. I remember my mum taking me to the pictures to see Oklahoma when it came out in the 50s. So I was well served. I mean, I was filled up with entertainment. They liked that stuff. The Crazy Gang were extraordinary, actually. They've always stuck with me. I didn't understand most of it. I mean, the double entendre were mostly went over my head, which is probably a good thing. But I knew things like when I can't remember which of the pair it was. It was like either Norton and Gold or Nervo and Knox. So they do this thing where they'd suddenly appear in a box and talk back to the stage. And there was a Western sketch going on the stage. Cowboys, with Bud Flanagan and Monsieur Eddie Gray with cowboy hats on. There's some nonsense going on the stage. And at some point, one of these, the couple, because it was 3 comedy pairings that made up the Crazy Gang. One of them in the box stood up and went, "Marshall," and he got this star. Right on. And the other one stood up and went, "Snellgrove."
That's so bad it's good.
It's a very but that was the whole thing about the Crazy Gang. Of course, it was very, very low comedy, but that was just remembering that. Now, of course, Marshall Snellgrove was long gone, probably subsumed by John Lewis or something like that. But it was a huge department store in London at that point. But I thought it was hysterical, as a kid. I totally got what they were doing, and that informs your taste. I went to my first Edinburgh Festival in 1963 as an orchestral player. There was an orchestra which I'd been introduced to.
Edinburgh Rehearsal Orchestra.
Yes, ERO. I'd been introduced to them while I was at Felstead, which was a public school in Essex. And you're right, I got a music scholarship there. So I was playing. What I was being taught was orchestral violin, basically, and recital violin. At the same time, I was exploring, taking my first steps with guitar and ukulele and all those things, mostly guitar. But yes, the Edinburgh Rehearsal Orchestra, they would spend most of the year peripatetically going round establishments, playing at schools and sort of local arts venues. They were run by a man called Harry Legg, who was the principal viola player with the Royal Philharmonic, who got a fund of wonderful stories about Sir Thomas Beecham. But anyway, the high point of the year was always going to the Edinburgh Festival, and the way it was set up was this, that you would play through the week, you would rehearse, hence the rehearsal orchestra idea, the exact repertoire that you were going to hear played professionally that night at the Usher Hall. So it gave you a really, really good insight into the music you were about to experience in concert that evening. So you'd hear, you know, the Scottish Symphony or the Concertgebouw, or, you know, the great orchestras of the world that came to the real Edinburgh Festival, having bought a ticket for that in advance. But during the day, you'd have played that music, not just read the score or, you know, talked about it. I mean, you literally got the insight that only comes with playing. So it's a brilliant idea. And I did that for 2 years, 1963 and 64.
Take it back just a bit, because of course you had your first groups at school at that time as well, didn't you?
Yes.
Was it Monarch Tea Biscuit or something?
Monarch Tea Biscuit. I came probably later than 63. Oh, 63 might have been in existence. I started off with I think we were called the Sinners. I think, which was sort of based on the Shadows. Really, it was instrumental. We didn't sing. Mainly because nobody got a good enough microphone. It was one of those. But yeah, we played instrumental music, and then I got to be pretty obsessed before Monarch Tea Bisque, or around the time we called it that, with basically electric blues, Chicago blues. And that brought me in contact with, I think it was sort of the Chicago blues first, and then that brought me into contact with country blues. And of course we had touring blues packages in those days. So I was avid. I would go to anything because of the way my parents would kind of take me to shows. I was always going to things. I'd go to Cambridge from school for poetry readings and things like that. I go and blues packages, and in fact I think I saw one at the Free Trade Hall in '65 once I was in Liverpool. But you know, it's your chance to see people like I don't know, Lightning Hopkins and Sleepy John Estes, and obviously you know, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and all those, as well as the electric players. Yeah, obviously Howlin' Wolf and you know, Muddy Waters. It was just fantastic, and I loved that music. I was really, really, as so much of my generation were, powerfully affected by it. The same thing that spawned the Rolling Stones and carried everybody through, you know, right through Peter Green and Fleetwood Mac later on. So yeah, that was quite important to me.
Was it 63 though when you?
Well, that's what we started playing at school, and the Monarch Tea Bisque thing was simply that we were trying to find something. We said, oh, we've got to have an arresting name. We got some magazine like I can't remember what it was, a American pictorial magazine. It was an advert for two adverts. One of them for these. Oh, it might have been the same advert actually. They were sort of baking creations, you know, confectionery, and they were called Monarch was the company, and they were called Tea Bisques, so T-BISK. So there were Monarch Tea Bisques, and then underneath there were these things called Cherry Pinwheel Shortcakes. So we became Monarch Tea Bisque and the Cherry Pinwheel Shortcakes. That was the name of the band. We had little cards printed up and all this, and we worked under that name. I mean, in school holidays we would try and get gigs and all that sort of thing. So that was the earliest rock and roll I played. Yeah.
But then, was it at that first Edinburgh Fringe where you went to see Yehudi Menuhin?
Yes.
Because you were completely blown away, weren't you, by the Indian music?
Well, I'll tell you what blew me away as much as anything. Yes, I went to see Menuhin. I came away with a lifelong passion for Indian music. But that was because Menuhin, he set up a lunchtime recital. The tickets were free, but you only got a seat if you bought a programme. And the programmes were like £5, so it was quite a lot of money. But he brought with him Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan. So you had the best sitar, well, you know, in Western terms, the only sitar player you ever likely to hear, and the only sarod player you ever likely to hear. No tabla, just solo recitals from each of those wonderful players. So Menuhin opened the concert and played not terribly well actually. I mean, he was all right because it was Menuhin, you know. But he then introduced his Indian friends, and the rest of the concert, and it was in a church at the, I can't remember which way is west and which is east. I would guess the west end of Princes Street.
So the sound must have been incredible.
Exactly. You know, sitar in a church, and sarod, which has got that really hard, deep-throated, heavy percussive sound to it. Just brilliant, you know. And I was absolutely blown away by this. And I would say that was probably before George Harrison, probably, that I was hearing this. I would have been absolutely sort of contemporaneous with that. So once, you know, probably a year later, I heard Norwegian wood. And I go, oh, it's this instrument called the sitar, which George has just, you know. And I thought, yeah, I know what that is, you know. I actually gave a lecture at the school I was at as a society there called the Andrew Society, which was named after a headmaster called Andrew who was killed in a car crash. And it was meant to be a sort of broad-ranging intellectual thing. And I gave a lecture on Indian music of strings and drums. That was what I called it, and illustrated it throughout with sitar music. So tabla, obviously, Alaraka, you know, the great tabla players, and just tried to kind of put my passion across to the assembled 25 or whatever they were. But I was very keen on it, and I'd already, because of this passion for Indian music, I carried it on when I got back to school after having been introduced to this in '63 at the festival. I then joined a society in Cambridge, which is an Indian music society, and carried on my kind of general little, but it was, you know, and I read books and everything. But yeah, that's it must have been Christmas of '63 that my brother was and remains a doctor, although he's in his 80s now. But he trained as a doctor at Guy's Hospital, and when staff stay in hospital for 2 years, he was what they call a house surgeon, you know, so a junior doctor as they call them now. And the staff that remain in hospital, they have social events that when they're not on shift, as it were, they'll put on entertainments in the evening and all that sort of. But I was on one occasion sent out to St Thomas, which is a hospital for stomach, you know, a place where you go to have operations on your lower bowel and stuff. And I was ushered into this sideboard where there was this lady, very obviously Indian and sort of draped in sari type wear, you know, but in bed. And her name was Princess Sharda Rajay of Baroda. And Sharda, everybody called her Sharda. And I sang, I don't know what for her. And she was, you know, quite delighted by that. And we started talking, and I said, I'm obsessed with Indian music, I really like it. And I obviously touched something in her, you know. So when she got out of the hospital, she got in touch, and she wanted me to chaperone, she asked me to, and I did, chaperone her daughter, who was Princess Ujwale of Baroda, who was this absolutely exquisite girl, and just look after her in London. So I was given ridiculous amounts of money and asked to show Ujwale around London and sort of just to squire her. And so I did that, and then Sharda got, she talked to Baroda University, so I met this young lad, and they offered me the chance to go and study Indian music, that which I didn't do because I knew it would have taken me over. I was very passionate about it, and I just thought, that's an entire life. That's not a thing you do for 3 years. That's going to take me over forever. So I turned down the chance. Yeah. Well, I'll go with '64. I was playing with the Edinburgh Rehearsal Orchestra in '64.
I know.
Back desk of the seconds, as usual, and doing the usual thing. But on one night, I went to see a folk concert. I'd never seen folk music. I knew what it was, but I knew what it was in sort of Lonnie Donegan skiffle terms. And I went to this place called the Travers Theatre Club, which I didn't know, but it had been newly opened. And I saw two musicians, Owen Hand and Hamish Imlach, and they really again, wonderful, some original songs, but just terrific performances. I talked to them afterwards. I was a big one for going up talking to people afterwards. I remember Owen Hand saying, if you like these songs, you should get the Rebels Cayley songbook on the shelf in my room next door. There are 2 volumes of the Rebels Cayley songbook. He told me the bookshop to get them from in George Street, all the rest of it. The next year, before I even got to the Edinburgh Festival, I was in a gap year between school and university. And I did a stint clerking with a firm of solicitors in Covent Garden. Then I had another stint clerking with a barrister in Middle Temple, both of which were set up by my dad to kind of give me, because I'd decided already that I got my place at Liverpool, I was going to read law. And then, once I'd done those, I just dropped out, left home, decided to play with my band for 6 months and started living in a basement in Earl's Court, and then went and
Did you
lived
get any
there.
gigs?
Yeah, we used to have a regular gig in the Eros Club, which was, the band by then was called the Blouson Noir. In France, Teddy Boys were called Blouson Noir, well, or greasers, you know, black jackets, Blouson Noir. But we were the Blues on Noir, the Blues in black.
Yeah.
And we played the Eros Club, which was, the entrance was slap bang on Piccadilly Circus, as it was then, when Eros was in the middle and the traffic went all the way around it. And it was, do you remember the giant Coca-Cola sign? It was dead underneath that. There was a doorway there, and that was the Eros Club. We had a Saturday night residency there. And
What were you playing the standards? I mean,
no, we were playing blues. We were doing Smokestack Lightning. We were doing
you weren't not your own.
No, we weren't doing original material. No. It was just blues repertoire, and it was a beat club for foreign students. That was basically the clientele. It was run by a Persian guy. Persian in those days, of course. Persia still existed. His name was Sohrab, and it was brilliant for us. And I have pictures of us on stage there. And it was a great gig, but a lot of the time we didn't have that many gigs, you know, with the odd Mecca ballroom and things. But I was obsessed. I was introduced by somebody that I met, and I can't for the life of me remember how we met. This guy called Nigel Wight, still a friend, still in touch with him. He was a wonderful cross harp player, blues harp player. Real sort of Cyril Davis harp player, and he lived in Richmond, and he introduced me and the band to Eel Pie Island, which was a blues class, just brilliant. And so for about probably not much more than 9 months, but I used to go there Wednesdays and Sundays, blues nights. Well, Eel Pie Island introduced me to John Mayall, Graham Bond, Long John Baldry. Obviously visiting American players, I saw Jesse Fuller there, I saw Mae Mercer, Memphis Slim, Champion Jack Dupree, who lived in Bradford, so that hardly counted. All those great bands, the Artwoods, loved them, and my big passion was the Tridents, which was a local band, had this extraordinary lead guitarist who I later on found out was called Jeff, because it was Jeff Beck, before he joined the Yardbirds, played with his back to the audience and played wonderful, crazy blues, sort of with a repeat echoes with a Baby Echo Benson, just fantastic, you know. So yeah, I mean, it fed my passions mightily. But then after that, in the summer, I got this invitation, came about in a funny way, to go back to the Edinburgh Festival and actually perform at the Travis Theatre Club, which is where I'd seen the folk show
This
the
was
year
through
before.
the brother of
The drummer in my band.
bandmates,
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, Max.
The drummer was called John Stafford Clark, and Max was his brother. And Max was a student at Trinity College Dublin, and he first of all asked me to write a piece of music to basically a sort of intro and outro for a 1 hour play they were doing in the afternoon, which is an adaptation of a little book in a series. It was a sort of comic character called Twink, and that was now I'm doing it. And it was on in the afternoon, so I wrote this piece of music and I sent it on tape, and Max was very happy with that. And that was just to be played in. And then he got in touch with me in a panic, and he said, "Look, I'm doing a late night review, coming over with a company from Trinity College, and we're doing a late night review, and the guy that was going to do the music has just called in sick, and we open in 36 hours time. What are you doing now?" You know, and I said, "Well, nothing much." He said, "Well, can you come up to Edinburgh and put the show together musically, and, you know, now, you know." So I literally dropped everything, grabbed an electric guitar and an amplifier and, you know, 2 shirts, and went off up to Edinburgh, and that got me into the Travis Theatre Club. So we were doing a show called Stewed Irish, which went off round about midnight, or maybe 11 p.m. every night, for a fortnight. The first, I think it was the 2 weeks. I think the official festival was only 2 weeks then, and then there was a third week that followed on. But in the course of doing that, the Travis Theatre Club was just stuffed with these ridiculous people. It was run by Jim Haynes, who was the guy that then started the Arts Lab in London about 3 years later. But he'd founded this theatre club with a Scottish artist called Richard Thompson, who had a gallery in Edinburgh. Was a fine artist, a painter. And so there was a gallery for the paintings, there was a very small restaurant, there was a small bar upstairs. The theatre was 51 seats, and it was called the Traverse because the stage was literally a flat area lit by 6 lamps, 6 big Fresnel lamps, that was it. And the audience was a slight rake, so about 30 this side and about 20 this side, and that was it, 51 seats.
And who did you share a dressing room with there?
Well, what happened was I was staying with Max's company, so right. 13 to a room in Marchmont Road, the usual thing. But I met Viv Stanshall, who was playing with Lindsay Kemp, who's a mime artist, and that was one of the people that I shared a dressing room with. When in the transition between shows, I can't remember whether we were on after them or before them. I've got a programme somewhere. But Lindsay's company were 4 people. It was Lindsay and his boyfriend Jack Burkett, who worked under the name of the Great Orlando, and this lovely ballet dancer, a full proper on point ballet dancer called Letitia Stanforth, and then this strange pasty faced tall individual who mournfully walked about on stage playing the euphonium and saying things like, "Death is nature's way of telling you to slow down." And then he carried on playing euphonium. It was really strange. And his name was Vivian Stanshall, so that's how I met Viv. And of course, in the bits in between, got to know him really well. And he told me about the Bonzos. That was what introduced me to the Bonzo dog dude. But then the other company that came in and replaced Stewed Irish in the slot that we'd occupied was this very high-powered anarchic theatre group from Liverpool called the Scaffold. So that was how I met them, Roger and Roger McGough and Mike Cartney and John Gorman. And then in the afternoons, because of the Liverpool connection, all these other people showed up, including Adrian, Henri, Brian Patton, Pete Brown, Spike Hawkins, Heather Holden. We had local poets like Alan Jackson. I mean, just there was we would. Well, I say we. I mean, I got drawn into that, but they would do performances in the bar upstairs in the afternoons. The whole place was just a hotbed of people doing stuff. It was brilliant.
Do you know? It struck me reading a lot about this early part of your life up there. Yeah. It was like the Wild West in a way, wasn't it? Because you were all doing things that had never been done before, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see it in those terms. You did things because you were there, you know, and you had a passion for performance, obviously. And I was going to university somewhere to read law. I mean, that was the thing. In 1965, I didn't know I was going to go to Liverpool University. That decision was taken after I'd done this thing in Edinburgh. I then got home. I'd applied to the University Central Councils for admission for a university place, because I got crappy A-levels because, I was doing all this other stuff, and I was never an academic per se. I didn't really drill down and just work hard, So I took this out. I said, well, I'll go to Liverpool. That's where by then the Beatles had emerged. I mean, they'd emerged 18 months before that, and obviously I was thrilled by that. So I thought I'd go with that background, and on day one, I met Roger McGough, ran into him, physically bumped into him in a bookshop. He was nerding one way and I was nerding the other way. And he said, "Oh, Andy, what are you doing here?" I said, "I've come to go to the university." And I had all my hair cut off because I'd grown it during my gap year. And I was looking every inch of law student. He said, "Well, tonight, come to the Philharmonic pub, I'll introduce you around, And what I said. So the rot set in. I knew, within a day, I knew I wasn't going to get a degree worth having either. I did get one, but, very lowly, But I also knew I was going to have a bloody good time in Liverpool, So within 4 months, obviously once he introduced me around, I met all these people, and it was all centred on, in those days, the Philharmonic Hotel and the Crack in Rice Street, which is another old pub. And it was the art college crowd, really. But it was the poets and the people that hung around, and the Everyman Theatre, which was around the corner. So you can see, I just loved theatre. I was always drawn into theatre work, and I loved poetry. I mean, I totally never really met a lot of poets. I'd seen poetry and jazz in Cambridge when I was at public school. Went to see people like Laurie Lee and Danny Absey working with Jerry Robson, working with the Michael Garrick trio with Sheikh Keane and Joe Harriott. Joe Harriott, wonderful alto player. So I'd seen poetry working with music. I thought largely it didn't work. Yeah. Which led me on to when Roger said, "Oh, it'd be nice to collaborate on something," and he did that fairly soon after I got to Liverpool. But I mean, pretty much before the end of '65, I think. The first thing we ever did was February '66 at the Bluecoat Theatre, or the Sandon Theatre in the Bluecoat Chambers, and it was just me and Roger.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because the American beat movement, when they went into music, it was very much kind of, they were at war with each other. You know, they'd say a few words and then there'd be a wild saxophone bit. Yeah. And it didn't really.
I didn't think it.
Adrian, of course, summed that up quite well. I think at one point where he said, you know, music and the words and the music should flow together, should work.
Yeah. Well, certainly with Adrian, I achieved that really well, and he was very intuitive. He was like an instrumentalist that didn't play an instrument. You know, he was very good, and he listened very well. But I always saw the role of the music to be. It's a description I've used many times, which is that the music should lay a carpet for the poem to walk on, and in the way that if you walk into a room with a fantastically, beautifully woven Persian carpet, it's not necessarily the thing that obsesses your eye because you're looking above it, you're looking at the people, you're looking at the furniture, but it's always there. And the moment that you avert your eyes and look at it, my God, it's magnificent. And that's what I felt the music should be. It should be great, but it shouldn't intrude on the reason for its place within the ensemble, which is to support the poem. The poem is the main thing. So that was what I took into the work with Roger originally, and then soon after that with Brian down initially in London, and with Adrian. Brian Patton, yes. Also, I was working at the Everyman Theatre who loved me because I was free most of the time. I was such a nerd for performance. I get up and do anything, anytime.
I know Allen Ginsberg came over and he was staying on Brian Patton's
that was before my time. Yeah.
But I love the fact he said Liverpool at the present moment is a centre of consciousness of the human universe, to which Brian Patton replied, I think Alan believed that the centre of the universe to be wherever he was at the time, which is a lovely way of putting it. I love that line.
I only met Allen Ginsberg one time because I wasn't in Liverpool when he came up. That was just before that summer of '65. I think it was '65 he was in Liverpool. Anyway, doesn't matter. Lost the thread now. Alan. I met Alan one time. That was when Adrian and I went as the sort of precursors for the entire Liverpool scene band in 1969. We went to New York. We went over 10 days earlier than the band to kind of fluff up the material. Was the idea that we would kind of adapt it as if you could for American audiences. But because of Adrian's connection with Alan, they'd corresponded and all this sort of thing. He called up Alan and we met just up from Fillmore East at this place called the Gems Bar, where Alan introduced these things called egg creams, which was sort of like ice cream soda basically. And we had a few of them, and then we went back to his apartment in on the where is it, Lower East Side, and sort of around Tompkins Square, and we spent the evening with him, and it was a really fun evening actually, singing William Blake. We were sort of making up tunes and by turning Blake poems into songs and stuff. It had a wonderful time. I thought he was great. I enjoyed his company, but that was the only time I ever met him. The Liverpool Scene book, it came out, that was because of the patronage of Edward Lucy Smith, really. Teddy was really, he saw the poetry, he loved it, he liked the performance nature of it, and championed it, and eventually put a book together, which came out in, I think, 1967, called The Liverpool Scene. And things came, because of that publication, things emerged from it. One of which was a BBC thing called, it was a strand called, I think, Look at Life, presented by a guy called Dennis Toohey. And we came down and played on that. But at that point, some of the poetry and music was just poetry and beat music, like there was a band called the Almost Blues in Liverpool, led by a guy called Alan Peters, and he was, again like me, he liked poetry and was put up against, so it was sort of, if Adrian wrote his In the Midnight Hour, then they would play Wilson Pickett's Midnight Hour and Adrian's poem would be kind of grafted onto it, which is not the way that I particularly saw it, but that sort of thing was going. That was done for BBC Two. But no, what happened was we did a London performance at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art, but in those days it was in Dover Street, which is just off Piccadilly.
When you say we, that was you and Adrian?
Me and Adrian, Roger, Brian, and various others, Pete Brown and whatever. And what had happened, because of the TV thing, this guy, an American lyricist called Hal Shaper, who was into publishing, music publishing, and had written good tunes in his day, standards, got in touch with us up in Liverpool and said he'd like to record us doing stuff on the basis that he'd seen us doing on the BBC Two TV thing. So it was arranged that Hal would come down to the performance at the ICA, and then after that we would go off and he would book a recording studio and we would, in quotes, make a record. So he came along, but for various reasons he decided that what he wanted to record was Adrian, Roger and Brian Patton. The others not so much, and they were the principal participants in the Liverpool Scene book, I suppose, and me as musical accompanist. So the four of us were taken off to Regent Sound in Denmark Street, real Tim Pernally studio, where loads of good early British records had been made. And in the course of 2 hours in mono, we made this record. But what happened was that Brian, by then, we didn't start till about midnight. Brian was absolutely paralytic and not happy. He'd already begun to evolve his theories that, it was all showbiz and he didn't want to be a part of it. He wanted to be a real poet, and real poets don't get up on stage and cavort around. So he didn't, he was distancing himself from what was obviously because of the book and the attention that was focused on the TV thing. He was, no, I'm not going to do that. So he backed out, and he actually got up very drunkenly, and I remember him saying that when it was his turn to record a poem on the microphone, he lunged forward to the microphone and said, Roger used to be a poet, Adrian is a clown, I'd rather be a real poet than earn £1 million. And he turned around and walked out of the studio. The end. So that left Adrian, Roger and me to make a record, and that was the record you're referring to, which was called The Incredible New Liverpool Scene, although the band The Liverpool Scene came later. But that came out, and that in itself spawned good things. It's always been sort of, for me, it's just follow your nose. One thing begets another,
I believe you.
Yeah, it's the biblical thing.
Yes.
But always have something to do. Don't sit at home doing nothing, just if an opportunity presents itself, take it.
Absolutely.
So that February '66 was, having got to Liverpool as a student in September '65, February '66 was the first performance I did with Roger, and soon after that, by about May or June '66, I had been asked to work with the Scaffold in a sort of music accompaniment thing, because they're none of them instrumentalists. And they were beginning to write songs. Mike was writing songs, Roger setting lyrics of Roger's and some of his own, and they were beginning to see music as a necessary adjunct. They'd been signed by Brian Epstein, so they had a management backing. Epstein, because of his connections, got them a recording contract with Parlophone, so they needed a musical element, and I became the enabler for that. So I worked with them then for a couple of years.
Did you play in all their records?
No, not all. I did do a live album with them at what eventually became Abbey Road, but it was EMI Studios in those days, but the classic kind of St John's Wood studio. Did a live album and played on
Lily the Pink.
Played on Lily the Pink, notably. And
you've
also
got a #1 record in your...
Yeah, well, I don't know, was it ever #1? I'm not sure it was. It was a big hit one Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah.
We medicinal compound, most efficacious in every case. Mr. Frias had sticky out ears, and it made him awful shy, and so they gave him medicinal compound. Now you see, we'll never heard anti-milly and willy-nilly, and so they put her in a home where they gave her medicinal compound, and now he joins in all the games. Drink a lily, the pink, the savior of the human race.
That was good. It was a good experience. That was done at EMI as well, in Studio 2, which is the classic Beatles studio that you see in all the clips. And then later on, I recorded with them right through, because when the Grimm's concepts emerged, then I was still working with them. But also, we did this album, which was has turned in. It's a bit sort of legendary now. At the time, not so much. Roger and Mike got in touch with me.
And we got from the McGough.
We got from McGough, yeah. And they said, look, it was fairly well understood that this was before Lily had come out. So we might have recorded it, but it was all sort of a bit last ditch. Of course, Eppie had gone by then. He was not alive. And they were thinking of disbanding. They were thinking that the Scaffold basically didn't have any sort of forward motion, and that they probably would stop it. But they got material in the bank, songs that they'd written together. And Paul had given Mike, he as a gift, had said, look, come to London, I'll help you out with, we'll get some action on the publishing on those songs of yours and all this sort of thing. Come to London, we'll demo the material, so they can be played around. So I'll fix a studio and some sessions and some players and come down. So
you should mention that we're talking about Paul McCartney here, right?
Well, Mike,
for those, yeah.
I mean, he was, of course, in those days, he called himself Mike McGough to distance himself, but he was Mike McCartney, as he's reverted to being, quite rightly. So I came down in the back of Mike's car, basically, guitar and me in the back of whatever, fancy car he was driving at the time, and stayed for a couple of nights, 2-3 nights, at Paul's house in St John's Wood, in Cavendish Avenue. And the sessions were set in this studio called Delane Lee, which was on Kingsway. We went in through an underground car park and into a studio there. And my job was just to... Well, I knew the material because I'd worked with them up in Liverpool, and I knew the chords of the songs, everything. So obviously everything... as we went from song to song, I was necessarily the guy playing the rhythm part that was, that they were, all the initial stuff was sung to. So Paul was producing, he booked the studio, but what he'd done, obviously, was go round all of his showbiz mates and say, hey, I'm recording with our kid at Delane Lee, why don't you come down, I mean, it didn't kick off till about 10 o'clock at night, every night, and everybody kind of rolled in from the Bag of Nails or the Scotch St James, and it was just, every time the door opened, it was like another illustration from Melody Maker walked in, you know what I mean? The only people that were unknown were me and Dave Mason, who just joined Traffic. And the rest of them were all kind of name players. So I was slightly in awe of it all. I mean, I've never had a real sort of, hero worship of the stars, in quotes. But... the central role was Paul producing, obviously Roger and Mike presenting their material, and I had to be on everything. So, I mean, it put me right in the middle of it. So I got to play with all sorts of brilliant people. Graham Nash was there all the time, helping along, singing and doing stuff. I loved the one with Jimi Hendrix. There were all sorts of people just rocked up and did stuff. I know.
No,
so that was a great thing, but it was not a commercial release. It was not intended for release. It was meant to be demo.
They were under contract. They couldn't even.
You couldn't name them. It was for your ears only. It was just purely to demo the songs. But then later on, Parlophone, they heard the tape and they went, "What? You're kidding? We'll put that out," and sort of hint at the names, but not actually put any names on it. Because for a long time, if you were signed to one record company, you weren't allowed to record for another one. Well, nobody gives a monkeys now because nobody's signed to anybody. But, in those days, that was a big deal.
Do you want to do it then?
Yes, please.
Go.
They say the sun shone now and again, but it was generally cloudy with far too much rain. They say the greatest train robbery in history took place. Probably students. Who else would steal a train? They say cabinet ministers and osteopaths were particularly vulgar around this time. They say babies were born, married couples made love, often with each other, and people died, sometimes violently. They say it was an average, ordinary, moderate, run-of-the-mill, common or garden summer, but it wasn't. For I locked the yellow door, and I threw away the key, and I spent summer with Monica, and Monica spent summer with me. Unlike everybody else, we made friends with the weather. Most days the sun cold and sprawled all over the place, or the wind blew in as breezily as ever, and ran its fingers through our hair. But usually it's the moon that kept us company. Some days we thought about the seaside, and built sandcastles on the blankets and paddled in the pillows, or swam in the...
What I found interesting was that there was all this in the new sleep notes, blah, 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 blah. And I looked through it all in a few places, and I couldn't find your name anywhere.
No, because...
And what amused me most was I dug up the cover of the LP, and yours was the only musical name on it, which I thought was brilliant. So you kind of sort of airbrushed out the modern stuff because yours is not the same.
You've got to remember, Nick, that I was at the time that I was making this and Lily the Pink. I was a law student in Liverpool. I was at Liverpool University doing a law degree. There was literally 2 months ago for Hildegard Neal, lovely Hildy, who was acting in the repertory company at the Everyman, and I did a play for Pete James, who was the director all through my time in Liverpool, and also gave me the chance to write my first musical in 1973. But Hildegard was the principal actress of the rep company, and I was cast as an actor in a piece called The Sport of My Mad Mother, an Angelico play, which I loved doing with Bill Stewart and a good cast of Everyman regulars. And that was an acting job. I had to play drums in the course of the thing because it was like about sort of tribal a youth gang, it had sort of tribal overtones. That was the idea of it. And Hildy played the central character in that. So I'd done a lot of other things, that weren't musical, that were to do with just my obsession with theatre. I mean, I would go to everything at the Everyman, and I loved the building, and I loved the actors, and that was another thing, But it was all while I was a student. As I say, the Everyman loved me because I pretty much do anything. They did pay me for sport, but pretty much anything I'd do for nothing because I just loved getting up and doing it.
67, then I've got to mention John Peel.
Ah, well, that was from that record that I did with Roger McGough and Adrian Henri, the original Liverpool Scene album that we did with Hal Shaper. When it came out, there's good stories there actually. First of all, Hal tried selling it to various record labels. It eventually came out on CBS here, and which was epic in America because it was released in America as well. But he tried to sell it certainly to Decca, and Tony Hall at Decca said, "No, I'd quite like to put it out, Hal, but no, the board won't have it. They say it's all down to wanking and drugs." And that was because there's a Roger McGough poem that starts it off called "For You Everything's Going to Be All Right," and it's got great lines in it, and one of the lines was, "For you, marijuana will be on sale in the foyer," and another one was, "For you, they will discover that masturbation is a cure for cancer." So Tony Hawk's, that's all down to wanking and drugs. And when the record came out, both of those lines excised, right? And they got a coherent, flowing musical accompaniment that just goes da da da, it just jumps over the lines. It was completely arbitrary, but Hal had to cut them out. He had to edit those 2 lines out because it was all down to wanking and drugs, you know. So those are the times you were dealing with. But it came out on CBS, and it was, I mean, it was in the era of underground, you know. Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was part of what was going on. John was, then, he'd come back from America, but he was, John Peel, he was on Radio London, which was offshore pirate radio. To do this show called The Perfume Garden, which I first heard about from International Times, because my parents lived in London. When I wasn't at university in Liverpool, I would go home. I didn't stay in Liverpool with nothing much to do, living in a single room. I'd go home and get pampered, you know, and then get my washing done, and then go back to university. Because I was all this time, I was having to show up to lectures and do stuff, you know. And I was doing the regular, you know, university folk club and all that kind of stuff, and going to the Saturday night gigs, all the usual university stuff. So John, on Perfume Garden, which I heard once he started doing it, he broadcast from midnight to 2 a.m. every night. And he'd started playing the stuff which was becoming increasingly important to me, which was the psychedelia. You know, he'd play the Jefferson Airplane, he'd play Country Joe and the Fish, he'd play D'Antalion's Chariot and The Misunderstood, and, you know, all of these great underground classics, and Arthur Brown, you know, and Elba Gantry's Velvet Opera, and all this stuff. And he started playing our album. I'd never been on the radio before, never heard anything on the radio that I'd been involved with. He'd play a track, but then he'd play one track, and then he'd go, and he'd play a side to an album. You know, he'd play poem after poem after poem, and it was all there. So I was back at home, and I knew he was doing this, and he'd do it night after night. He was very obsessed with it because it was Liverpool, that ticked the box for him. And he just, you know, it was a decent album, it was fun. For its time, it really had got something to say. So, but the Peel thing was just simply that I was at home and I saw an advert in Melody Maker for one of those underground things, you know, like probably Implosion or something, at the Roundhouse, and it said DJ John Peel. And I thought, I've got to meet this guy, because he keeps playing this stuff every night. And there was, obviously, I don't know what the band was, but it was somebody that I was interested in. So I went to the gig, and at some point in the evening, I sidled up to John, who was there playing records or, you know, hanging about, and introduced myself. And he just sort of fell on me like a long-lost brother, and he just loved the fact that, so he must come round. So he was living in a basement flat at the bad end of the King's Road, down in sort of Putney, Fulham end. And he's still married to his first wife, Shirley, then. So I used to go round when I was back in London. And then he started visiting us up in Liverpool as well, and he'd come and sleep on the floor, you know, sleeping bag at 64 Canning Street. And he became really integral to just the whole underground scene in Liverpool, and, you know, he through the sort of Adrian Rogers, Scaffold, Liverpool scene, the poets, the everyone, whatever, he tapped into all of that. So when he got a bit more profile, which came on the back of the Marine Offences Act, because they put the pirates out of business, basically, towards the end of '67, this thing called the Marine Offences, which said you cannot broadcast. You know, they were just outside territorial waters, but the Navy could come in and arrest him. So that just blew them out the water, metaphorically. And he got his first gig, which was a show called Top Gear on Radio 1, which was a Sunday afternoon. It was a 2-hour show, and he shared it with Tommy Vance, about as incongruous a pairing as you could imagine. So Tommy did an hour, and Peel did an hour.
Love is feeling cold in the back of vans. Love is a fan club with only 2 fans. Love is walking, holding paint-stained hands. Love is fish and chips on winter nights. Love is blankets full of strange delights. Love is when you don't put out the light. Love Love is the present in the Christmas shops. Love is when you're feeling top of the pops. Love is what happens when the music stops. Love is. Love is when you open Valentine's. Love is when you read those awful old rhymes. Love is when you read between the lines. Love is. Love is you and love is me. Love's a prison and love is free. Love's what's there when you're away from me. Love is.
But by then, universities who had, you know, a little underground show that they put on a Saturday afternoon, that sort of thing, they were inviting him to do, you know, why don't you come, we're doing, you know, Loughborough Tech, you know, can you come and play some records and talk about music to us? So he would do it, and he said, you don't have to pay me, I'm paid by the BBC, but I want you to book these people, and it was a small clique of bands. So by then, Liverpool scene was going as a poetry band. That was me and Adrian and Mike Hart, Mike Evans. It was Tyrannosaurus Rex, Roy Harper, Davy Graham playing acoustic guitar. Wonderful, I mean, the great acoustic guitarist. Can't think who else. Principal Edwards Magic Theatre, they emerged from that. And so he'd say, you've got to book at least 2 of these people, and then I'll come and do it for nothing. So he really patronised a very defined area that were the Peel artists, you know. So we got work out of that, and that started breaking us, because when we first started playing as a band, which really happened on the back of my graduation, I graduated in July 68, and the day that I graduated was the day that Adrian Henri handed in his notice as a lecturer at Liverpool College of Art. And we became a full-time band. And then this lovely man called Sandy Robertson who'd got in touch with me before that, wanting us to record as a band. We were able to move along with that, and he got us signed to RCA Records, and we came down in September of 1968 and made our first album. Made in a day, made and mixed the following morning, you know. It was one day, that was it, you know. 2 3-hour sessions, and then a 3-hour mix-down session the next day, and back to Liverpool. And that came out, and it was Amazing Adventures of, and it sold really well, and you know, that started the ball rolling. Before that, it was, you know, a big deal if we played in Warrington. You know, after that, we were playing in Plymouth, Newcastle, and London.
Not to mention,
you know,
the Isle of Wight.
And well, that came a year later. By then, we were well established. Yeah, but Sandy was a great operator. He managed us, he published us, he produced us. He was, you know, he Svengali'd the whole thing into existence, and not just us. He had a stable of artists, but he really put us on the map.
Tonight, at noon, supermarkets will advertise threepence extra on everything. Tonight, at noon, children from happy families will be sent to live in the home. Elephants will tell each other human jokes. America will declare peace on Russia. World War I generals will sell poppies in the streets on November the 11th. The first daffodils of autumn will appear when the leaves fall upwards.
But, I mean, we had personnel changes. We lost Mike Hart quite early in the thing. Sort of October 68 or something like that. Harty was gone. And it was like lancing a boil in a sense. You know, that often happens with bands. I mean, but at the time we thought, oh God, because he's such a wonderful singer and writer, we thought, oh, it's going to leave a huge hole. First show we played with him not there, we played so well. And we immediately gelled in a different way, and it became musically a much richer experience. It was just the making of the band, really, and we no holding back. And we just flew with that, and then we toured with Led Zeppelin in sort of May, June of '69. First UK tour, which didn't even sell out. amazingly. I remember playing the Colston Hall and thinking, where are they? Where are the people? I thought there was half empty, ridiculous for a Led Zeppelin concert, imagine. But in '69, that was their first UK tour. Half the people didn't know who they were. They were caught between that. Is it the New Yardbirds? Is it Led Zeppelin? Who's in it? All that thing, So it was very early days for them, but they went off like a train because they were such a big, sexy rock act, Whereas we were just a weird parochial poetry and jazz thing, And then the Isle of Wight came later on that summer at the Bath Festival, and then we went off to America, September of '60.
Do the Dylan Rock! The Dylan Rock!
This was a sample of what they'd come for. 170,000 pop fans invaded the Isle of Wight for the 3-day festival of music. Bob Dylan was the star. But while they waited for the top spot artist, there was plenty of other with it music and plenty of groups to provide it. This was the Liverpool scene.
34 people, under 800 gallons of ice cream soda. Bobby and the helmet died that night.
They'd come, they'd camp, they'd dance, they'd listen to their idol. There was some disappointment that Dylan's appearance wasn't longer. Nevertheless, they got what they came for, one of the biggest hippie happenings ever. The power of pop had made it a memorable happening, as they say.
Yeah. You know why that came about? It's because the Pathé News people couldn't be asked to wait for Bob Dylan.
Oh, because
they were there in the afternoon.
Because he's the announcer, says Bob Dylan's playing later today, but there's also this one.
Yeah, we were the most visual thing in the afternoon.
I mean,
although Richie Havens was pretty good, but you got to say,
Adrian was like a sex god on the stage.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just absolutely.
He's caroling about the stage.
And
Mike Evans
he's
on his
pulling
back
his
playing the
T-shirt up and
sax.
striking a sexy pose.
All of that,
I mean, I have to say that.
Well, it was an act. It was that was it. Tom Paxson, Julie Felix. That was somebody standing behind a microphone singing folk songs. Well, they didn't want that. They weren't going to wait for Dylan and the band. They wanted to get off the fucking island before the crowd started leaving. So that was it. We were on at like 1 p.m. or something like that. So the job done. 3 o'clock. Let's go. We got them. So we were on the Pathé News the next day.
But I just thought his performance. I mean, I think it was John Peel who said about him. He said he was one of the best non-singers I've ever seen.
Yeah.
He was just brilliant. I think.
For me, it was wonderful because I was shy. I mean, I know out of all of this, you have to factor in the fact that although I was passionate about all the things, about the music, the poetry, the theatre, all that kind of stuff, I just loved it. I was steeped in it. But me myself, I sort of represent myself through that passion. But as a person, I was very, very shy, and I was not a natural in the spotlight. And I was handed on a plate by Adrian the chance to be in my favourite place, which is 3 feet to the left of and 1 foot behind the guy in the spotlight, who is brilliant. So he would be barreling up and he'd just bring it on, personality, just radiating from this massive guy, 18.5 stone he was in those days. And I could you see that Isle of Wight footage, and there's all this stuff going on in the front, and there's this bloke at the back with long hair, just head down, playing guitar. And that's me, that was it. It's like Richard Thompson with the Fairports, the same thing, Richard's not a visual experience, really. In the early days, he was all about the music, and that was me. I was all about the music, really, and all that stuff. We were talking about Zeppelin in America. No, we never toured them in America. What happened was that we did the UK tour, which was, I think, 9 shows. We finished up, the last show was at the Albert Hall. It was part of a week of shows called the Pop Proms. One of them was our tour package, which was Led Zeppelin, Liverpool Scene and Blobbing Pig. And then I think the next week they went over to America and they played the Newport Jazz Festival. And they wore, on the Jazz Festival, they wore Liverpool Scene promotional T-shirts that said Bobby and the Helmets, which was a mythical band that we used to talk about with Liverpool Scene. And they all wore Bobby and the Helmets T-shirts, and I think that tended to suggest to people that Liverpool scene would in some way evolve with Zeppelin in America, because the pictures that emerged from this, which have been used, there's some very high quality pictures of all of Zeppelin wearing Bobby and the Helmets t-shirts, so that associated with the band, with them in America. But we knew them and we saw them in America. When we went to America on tour in September '69, we were in New York at the same time.
Who did you tour with on that one, or was it just you?
Yeah, it was just, well, we went over as a band, yeah.
But you weren't with a couple of bands?
It wasn't a package, no, we were just looking for individual dates. We played with Sly and the Family Stone, The Association, weird gigs actually. We had, major numbers about Yates's Wine Lodge in Lime Street. It didn't translate. By the time we got there, it's 1969, acid was everywhere. It was Fillmore West in San Francisco, Fillmore East in New York, and we were this weird band, with this very parochial stuff about Liverpool. Our obsessions were different, and also when we weren't playing our music, we were obsessed with jazz and art, paintings, all that kind of thing. Nothing really, and we were playing to audiences, 5,000 kids, all of whom were tripping and kind of lying on the floor like that. And it's fine if you're the Who, or we played with War in Philadelphia, with Eric Burden, and all that. Full tilt rock, and that gets through that kind of narcotic haze. But to be honest, you needed a bit of intellectual smarts for our thing. So mostly it didn't work. It worked best on the show with The Association, who drew us slightly what Americans call a preppy audience, little studenty. But just generally, it hadn't gone well. Nobody was that interested in us. We got some press coverage, we got a bit of support from the record company, so we did interviews and stuff like that, but we lost money hand over fist, and we got back and we had a debt of, I think, around £5,000. It was a lot of money in 1969. So we actually did what I think was probably our most important album when we got back, which the third album, which is called the St. Adrian Company Broadway and Third, I think it was called, which was basically, there was this bar which we inhabited in New York called the St. Adrian Company, which was a very arty bar. But we did a track called Made in USA, and I think that's the single greatest legacy of that band, I tend to think. Although we did a lot of other things, and it doesn't denigrate other things, but I think that was probably, for me, artistically, that was the pinnacle achievement.
America, you're a new bird. Eagle, dove, hawk, you're a new bird. Spreading your wings faster and farther than any bird before. Out of Kennedy Airport, into the first magic landscape of early evening Manhattan, fingers of light pointing upwards to the sky and the moon.
But by then the band was in massive disarray. We were disagreeing about the direction forward, and I think it was that the curtains were definitely closing, and this debt hung over us. So when the band broke up quite messily in May 1970 on stage at the London School of Economics,
nice,
or maybe backstage after the gig, big bust up, and we went, all right, that's it, and everybody said, right, tomorrow night's gig is not happening, and it was wound up there and then. My way forward was to leave Liverpool, because I thought, well, okay, I'm in Liverpool, no band, why am I here? No good reason. I'm not going to stay in Liverpool and be, hopefully a big cockroach on a small dung heap. I'm now going to go back home, lick my wounds in London and try and get a career in London. but obviously by then I'd burnt my bridges. I had to do it in music, really. So I left, packed everything up, shoved it in the car, drove off, went to see a girlfriend in Wakefield on the way, and then I drove down to visit Principal Edwards, who were living in a commune style in a place called Moulton Grange Moulton Grange Farm in Northamptonshire, and proceeded to go and get absolutely rat-arsed with their light sky Les one lunchtime, and then came back and started racing motorbikes round the farmyard, round where they were living, had a massive prang, fell over on a gravel area and absolutely ripped this elbow to shreds. Got hospitalised in Northampton, so that was a complete disaster. And so that had to be patched up, and for the next 4 months this arm was in plaster. And
that was 1970.
1970. So I lived at home with my mum and dad, planning what I was going to do next, and I decided I was going to have my own band. It was going to be called Everyone, because I like the inclusivity of the title. And I started recruiting people to be in it, for various people that I'd met on the road. John Porter, guitarist. My mate David Richards, who'd been playing with another of Sandy Robertson's bands called PC Kent on bass. And John Pearson on drums. I can't remember how I met John, but we got on fantastically well. I wanted him in there. John Porter, who lived in Newcastle, brought in Bob Sargent, and that was the original Everyone band. So we rehearsed it for a month in the country, like you do. And then our first gig was the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970, the Thursday afternoon, so it's like a sort of pre-festival performance. We recorded the band, went on the road, and less than 2 months later we had a road accident which wrote off the van and really sadly wrote off Paul Scard, who was the road manager, who was driving us and had basically been part of the team that
were you all in the
drove
when it happened?
No, I wasn't. Paul was part of the team that had roaded for Liverpool scene right at the end of its career, when, as I say, there'd been personnel changes and ruckuses. There was a guy called Frank Garrett who come in on drums briefly, but only for about 3 weeks before the band split. Paul and he was part of the road managing team, and he was killed. He'd stuck with me out of friendship and loyalty through the time that I was unable to play and all the rest of it. Paul would come around to the house and we'd plan how the band was going to be and all the rest of it. Bless his heart, lovely, 19 years old, dead on the A33 at Basingstoke. So it really hit me hard. We lost all the gear, the van was written off. I mean, the financial implications were massive. It was my big for, to move on from the reputation that I gained with Liverpool scene, and the last thing I wanted to do was to go on the road and be responsible for anybody after that, So it was a really difficult time, but most of it was just having to deal with Paul's death and funerals and grieving parents and all that stuff. I mean, it was just horrendous, Nick. You can't believe it. Fairport had gone through that, of course, the year before with their crash on the M1. There was a lot of crashing in those days because vehicles weren't as reliable. Anyway, I was at home not wanting to go on the road, and comes back to Scaffold. Mike McCartney, bless him, knew what had happened to me, and Paul Samuel Smith had, in the course of talking to him about whatever, in a phone call, had said that he was producing an artist and he was looking for a guitarist that would work with this artist on his songs. Mickey said, well, I know a guitarist who has gone through this horrendous experience and doesn't want to go out on the road touring and could just be the guy you're looking for. So Paul Samuel Smith phoned me up out of the blue, didn't know him, might have met him on the McGough and McGear sessions, but I didn't remember him from there. And he said, I've got this singer called Iain Matthews. You might remember Matthews, Southern Comfort. I said, yeah, I remember them. But, well, they've split. It was only ever a solo project for him, really. And I want somebody, a guitarist, because he's a great singer, but he's not a particularly adept guitarist. I want somebody to come in and work on the songs with him. So I went round to meet Ian in Hampstead, where he was living, and we just hit it off. We got on really well. We were born within 4 days of each other. We had similar tastes, similar experiences. He had a totally different skill set to me, but we really got on. We tended to bond over a backgammon set. We were both avid backgammon players at that point. So that started the things. I'd go around and spend time with Ian working on his songs, and then when he went in the studio in early 71, I went in with him, and lo and behold, I had a session career. I mean, I knew nothing about studio work, really. Liverpool scene never knew what they were doing in the studio. We just play as though we were on stage, all set up and play together and all that, you know. There was no sort of all the techniques, microphone techniques, overdubbing, you know, the myriad of things that are different. That would have been wasted on Adrian, wouldn't it? Possibly, yeah, that's possible. I don't know, it was just a different thing. It was a very musical environment with Ian, and so that got me into that, and much sort of came from that, because I met Tim Rennick, I met obviously Dave Mattox and Dave Pegg, I met Pat Donaldson, I met Jerry Conway, I met Richard Thompson, I met Sandy Denny, I met Keith Tippett. I mean, just all these fantastic people that then became the fabric of life for the next 7 months, at the end of which I've been in the studio 4 sessions a day for 7 months, and I made so much money that I could buy a house. 90, well, it wasn't much of a house. It cost less than $5,000, but I put the deposit down. I put $2,000 down on the house by July, having been, flattened by a road accident the previous December. So it just shows you what was there, you know. But I was well employed, and I was playing music I loved.
And the light I find reflected guides the way among the hearts left by the road. By the way you seem affected, I can almost taste the bitterness you show. Fly away from me, try to find the reason, and in a day you'll be wandering again. If I fall about you now, I may never find.
And during that time, the Scaffold were moving towards amalgamating what was left of the Scaffold. Well, in that their career had really sort of finished. They weren't doing a lot as the Scaffold. It was more as individuals. They were drawing closer to Viv Stanshall and Neil Innes, and they brought me in again on the musical side. And the concept of Grimm's emerged. But before that really came to its fullest flowering, Neil and Viv decided that they were... Is this going to bug you up? We hadn't factored that in, had we?
No, I don't think so.
We can live with a bit of
rain.
rain.
More light though. Could you put that light on beside you, maybe?
We can. I like to put an overhead on.
Yeah. Let's see what that does. It might be.
Settled a score with that running saw who did not deserve to live. Given him a wart on the back of his neck that he could not forgive. He swore to kill the stranger for this one bad thing he'd done. For 13 years he practiced until...
That I remember well doing it at Maida Vale. Anyway, that was a band that went on early in '71. This band that later on was called Bonzo Dog Freaks was put together, rehearsed, and started touring.
Sorry, who was in the Bonzo Dog?
David Richards on bass, Ian Wallace on drums, who'd come in from Neil's band, The World, Neil Innes and The World. Neil, of course, Viv. Bubbles Wight on guitar. It was me and Bubs. That might be it. But it only lasted for one tour. I mean, it was this thing that... do you know the Todd Browning film, that Freaks, from 1936? Oh, it's great underground piece of cinema, where he used actual anatomical freaks, circus freaks, and wrote this narrative around it. Yeah. It's a great film, very powerful film, which Viv loved. And he loved the idea of having a band composed of people who really had physical abnormalities. Viv was just, by then, was a great friend of mine. When I moved back from Liverpool, and all through that time that I was laid up with the arm and all that sort of thing, Viv was just rescuing my peace of mind. I mean, I would always stay in touch with it. We were good friends. And so he lived in East Finchley, which was quite close to my parents' house, which was in Stanmore. So I drive over there, it'd take 20 minutes. His marriage with Monica was breaking up, I think, at that point. And he was around. We'd go off, I'd shove him in the car and we'd go off and we'd have Indian meals and we'd go into town and rave about, you know. I mean, it was nothing to drive in from 12 miles out of London and spend the evening in London going, 4 different places and then drive back home again. Now you wouldn't do it, because where the hell would you park? And, you could, all that, But it was different then. You could park anywhere. So that was a big part of my thing. When we drive round, Viv was already thinking about the idea of Bonzo Dog Freaks, a band that composed of actual freaks. So, you'd see somebody kind of bloke with one leg walking down the street, and Viv was, Andrew. I'd pull over and I had a minivan and it had slidey windows, and he'd suppress it and he'd open the window and he'd say, I say, do you play bass guitar? He was always looking for musicians. At one point we auditioned a midget drummer at Neil's house in Slaithwaite Road in Lewisham. I don't know who found it. I think Neil had found it. I don't remember. It was one of those things where you open the door and go, look down at this bloke was about this high. And he got a full drum kit where the drums were about this big, like a kiddie kit, It was fantastic. And
was he good?
He looked great. He got a sort of mod suit velvet collar. He had very straight hair, beautifully cut, and shades, and this drum kit and all the rest of it. And we were, he set it up in the corner and he started playing. He was bloody awful. Couldn't keep time, and just
because you had that with Spoons as well, didn't you? Was it Spoons?
Oh no, that was Sam. He was in the original band. Yeah, Sam Spoons, Martin Ash, wonderful man. Yeah. Oh, don't get me started.
Okay.
Well, I just got we lost him. Sally loved him, and we just adored Sam. But that was later on. But this was the Freak. So anyway, that didn't work out. Eventually, Ian Wallace came in and played drums. That was a little tour thing that we did. But then I was still doing my session work all through. Then Ian wanted.
You were making an album as well, though, weren't you?
I was always making an album then because I was signed to Sandy, and he was always book some time. You know, he just put me in Sound Techniques. I mean, there was an album that I started in 1971 and didn't finish till 1973.
Rise from your bed and come down into the moonlight world, the moonlight world. Someone whose head is cool waits for you. The moonlight world, the moonlight world. She's in the dark, tall and white, alone in the moonlight world, the moonlight world. Go to the park, fall apart. Back home to the moonlight world, to the moonlight world. She's the queen of the moonlight world. She's the queen of the moonlight world. She's the queen of the moonlight world. Moonlight world.
Which is my second album, in fact, called Nina and the Dream Tree.
I've heard a bit of that. I really liked it.
It's a good old
Your first album was homegrown, wasn't it?
Yeah. Actually, no, the Dream Tree I think was done all in '71. I think it was Urban Cowboy that started in '71 and goes through to '73.
Too old to cross my fingers. It's almost worth the wait. Don't know how to say this. I guess I came too late. I've seen the movie for the second time. Suppose that I'm too young to close my mind. But someone slammed the door, put a shoulder to the door. What do we do it for? I'm up here on the screen. You think that I don't see you, whatever makes you think you can be seen. I'm in the movie for the second time. Let me be in your movie. You can be in mine. And the seats are all one price. It's really worth the price. Carved from solid ice.
But I was still doing the sessions and all that stuff as well. I mean, I just kept busy. There was always stuff going on.
I can tell.
Yeah.
Even without the stuff I don't know.
Yeah. So what happened was Ian's first album was, I don't know when it came out, but he got an American tour lined up, and he was going to do it as a band originally. We were going to have again my great friend and collaborator David Richards and Timmy Donald on drums, and me and Richard Thompson and Ian fronting it. It was going to be Ian's band for the American tour. And at the last minute, he decided he wanted to do it just as an acoustic trio, just with me and Richard. Nobody else, just the three of us. That's what we were going to do. So that's how we went to America in sort of July-ish, 71.
Couldn't stay for more. Your carpet hung upon your wall, your blankets are on the floor. Greenwich Village after dark, you know, everyone was free. You wanted a guitarist, but what you got was me. And radio ladies sought my mind out, your fingers going deep. Radio ladies sought my mind out, then we go to sleep. The clothes store on 8th Avenue that the 20s left behind put leather around my shoulders and spaces in my mind. I couldn't walk the streets alone, I don't understand it quite.
Toured for a couple of months. It was very up and down, but it was an interesting time because Ian was the act. The band was me and Richard. So the way that Mercury had booked it, because they were booking everything, they basically, Ian got the single room and Richard and I were in a double room everywhere. So I just shared hotel rooms with Richard Thompson for 2 months. So I guess I got to know Richard really well, and we were, became very good friends at that time. Before he was a Muslim and before he'd married Linda, we were, in fact, I was dating a girl, and Linda was her flatmate. She rented a room off Philippa, my girlfriend, and so I'd see Richard on the sort of double date principle, really, a lot of the time then. And he and Linda married fairly soon after that tour, I think, in 71. But we did that. That was a great experience. I loved the tour. That was when I met the Eagles. And introduced them. Well. Oh yeah, I introduced them to Viv Stanshall when they came over. When they came over and did their first album, whenever that was, they were recording in Olympic in Barnes. Glyn John's producing, and Glyn's a producer engineer, so he was just there on his own with the T-pop, and that's fantastic. Anyway, so he brought the Eagles over to make their first album, And the first night that they were in London, obviously they were desperate to, you know, who's going to be our man in London? You know, so Glenn Fry phoned me up. Basically, you know, can you? But you know, we would list the drugs that they wanted. Basically, you know, usually. Well, you don't come from California and not have somebody in London that's going to come up with the grass. You know, so that was easy to do. So I went round, and they were stopping in Maida Vale, and I started hanging around in Olympic while they were making that first album. You know, the one Peaceful Easy Feeling, Taking It Easy, and all that Tequila Sunset, Sunrise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
No, Tequila Sunset is, that's a drink, isn't it?
Yeah.
And McGough, no, Tequila Sunrise is a drink. That's right, because it's tequila and it's got that sort of grenadine that kind of comes up like the rising sun. It was McGough that invented the concept of the Tequila Sunset, which is tequila and Horlicks.
Yeah. What a revolting mix.
Yeah. But a great concept. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, so I hung out while they were making that album. One of the things was they only got one night off. Glyn worked them really hard. He was a real martinet. And they had just an evening off in London. And I said, but you know, you've only got one evening. What do you want to do? I'll sort it for you. And I said, and Fry and Henri. So drummer Glenn Fry and Don Henry said, do you know Viv Stanshall? I said, yeah, I know him. I said, he's one of my greatest friends. I said, can we meet him? That was what they wanted to do on their night off, was to meet Viv Stanshall. They'd seen them play at Fillmore, I think, or maybe in LA, might have been, I don't know, Forum or the Whiskey or somewhere. They'd seen the Bonzos play, and they were just blown over by it, and they loved the idea of meeting Viv. So I fixed it up, and we went for an Indian with Viv in East Finchley. So the only one that didn't come was Randy Miser. Bless his heart, he's just died. Lovely man, wonderful singer. But it was Bernie Ledden, Fry and Henri in my minivan. So Bernie was the oldest, so he got the passenger seat.
Right.
Yeah, and Fry and Henri sat in the back of a minivan. That you can imagine the Eagles in the back of a minivan on a bit of rubber that I got there.
They weren't that big though.
It was their first album. They were unheard of. They formed the band literally during the time we were in LA with Iain, hanging around the Troubadour. They were always there. They were Linda Ronstadt's backing band. They literally got the money from Geffen and come up with the name, and were hoping that they could snare Glyn Johns into producing their first album.
It's a hell of a headline, isn't it? Curry with the Eagles and Viv Stanshall.
Well, yeah, and Viv faked a heart attack in the middle of the meal just to see what they were doing. I'd love to know. I've never seen them since that night, I don't think. Oh no, I have seen them. I saw them in the studio since then, but I never saw them since that session. Oh yeah, I did. I ran into the next year when they were doing Desperado. They were in the other studio recording Desperado, because I remember that song. And that was the last time that I ever saw them. Anyway, you know, it was just kind of craziness. But Viv, of course, would do stuff like that, and he just wanted to weird them out. So he faked a heart attack, and then sent me back to the house to get his, in quotes, pills. There weren't any pills. I knew there weren't any pills. He just wanted to have a go at them, you know, freaking out the Californians. So God knows what he did. But then I did.
That was 1970.
I think it was 71. I think that was. You know, it could only have been after the. I've never met them until we did the Matthews tour. You know, the tour with Iain and Richard Thompson in 71.
1971. If my times are right, which they may not be, as we've established, was the Cat Stevens moment, wasn't it? Really.
Well, that was during the session period. Yeah, early in the year when I was just the second career. That was just a weird thing. It was we were at Morgan Studios in Wilson, and I just finished a session with Iain, and there was a transition. Paul Samuel Smith produced both Iain and Cat Stevens, who by then was a big act. I mean, his career was a long way ahead of Iain's, and he'd had a big hit with his album Tea for the Tillerman, and before that Monobone Jake, and they've both done ridiculously good business. And the transition came. All of the other musicians had left. I was packing. I got a guitar, and I also had this weird instrument called a Krivaczeck string organ.
Take a plank of wood, 9 strings, and a chunk of genius. Throw in a pinch of inventive skill, and you have a new and versatile musical instrument. It is designed by a Londoner called Paul Krivaczeck, and it's called the Krivaczeck string organ.
To start with, it's the only instrument that has strings which play when you put your finger on them, like this. And the note will sustain as long as you keep your finger on the string, stopping only when you take it off. What's the advantage of it? Well, it means that you don't have to waste one hand bowing or plucking like you do on violin or guitar. You simply play with two hands like on the piano, and each hand has a separate job of work to do, melody and accompaniment.
I heard him on Radio 4, so I phoned him up. took a while to work out what his name was and to get his phone number from the BBC, and then I phoned him up, and he'd been demonstrating this instrument. So then I went round and sat down with him, and I ended up with the only production version of this instrument, which was called a Krivaczeck string organ. His name was Paul Krivaczeck. Long gone now, Paul, bless him, and I miss him mightily, but a wonderful man. Handed me a lot of my career on a plate further down the line. Anyway, so I had the string organ, so I was packing all this stuff up. In came Alan Davis, who was Steve is Cat Stevens. His real name is Stephen something or other, something Greek, but Steve is what we always call him. So he came in for the Steve session, but it was just Alan. Now I knew Alan because I'd worked with him with Sidney Carter and Jeremy Taylor. That was early on. They were. Sidney was. He wrote Lord of the Dance, a wonderful poet, and a grand old. He was I want to say a Quaker, really, in his leanings anyway. Had strong kind of fundamentalist religious principles. And Swan, of course, was the Swan of Flanders and Swan. Jeremy Taylor, and Sidney worked with Swan. I played, at one point, I played at St Paul's Cathedral one lunchtime with Sidney Carter, Donald Swan and me. There was another one. My dad came to that because he worked in the city. That was probably in 67 or 68. And then Jeremy Taylor was this South African singer-songwriter who'd come to London. He'd been a teacher in South Africa, and I think he came to London as a teacher, but I think he was tied in with a South African musical called Wait a Minute, which had been a hit in South Africa and then came into the London West End. A theatrical producer, impresario called Leon Gluckman brought it over, and Jeremy was friends with him. Anyway, for some reason I was paired with Jeremy. I can't remember how that came about. Probably through Sydney, I think, but I don't know how I met Sydney through the afternoon poetry readings at the Travis Theatre Club in Edinburgh. It's all networking, and it's like a giant mesh, Nick, I can't tell you. We ended up with Liverpool scene. We did a week at the Arts Theatre in Great Newport Street, and that's something that's on Google, with Sidney Carter and Jeremy Taylor and the Liverpool scene backing these other two artists. So that was how I knew Alan anyway. I'd done sessions with him. Lovely bloke that's still working with Steve now, I think. And so I was showing him the Krivaczeck string organ. I said, you got to see this. I plugged it in. I can't describe this instrument. It's just the most wonderful sound, really evocative sound. Beautiful. Real string, real flesh on, real frets, but a sound, ethereal sound like nothing else. And so while I was doing this, in came Steve for his follow-up session. And
did you know him at this point?
Yeah, I'd met him through the fact that he was produced by Samuel Spector. He was not on my Christmas card list.
No.
And he started running through this song that he'd written called How Can I Tell You? And I had a guitar on a stand, and I picked it up and started playing along because it's lovely, had a lovely cadence to it. And Alan and I very quickly latched into a lovely kind of harmony part. Well, Steve was not a finger picker particularly. He was a very effective rhythm player, a good guitarist, and a consummate songwriter, wonderful singer. Yeah. But anyway, the next thing was Robin Black had run out some microphones and scuttled off and was recording it. And I never thought anything more about it. We put down a basic track. I remember offering to go, and Steve said, no, stay there, it's fine, it's good, I like it, So we recorded it. Then Steve said, yeah, can you put that instrument, because he heard it when he walked in, didn't you put a solo on, you know, play a bit of that instrument, let's have that on there. So I put on a solo with the string organ and a bit of playing and a bit of play out, and packed up and left. I wasn't there, the way I remember it, I wasn't there a huge length of time, maybe an hour in total for the whole thing, maybe an hour and 20, I don't know. But then I was gone. So then the album came out, his album, it's called Teaser and the Firecat. And there was the track that I played on.
Whoever I'm with, I'm always talking to you. I'm always talking to you. And I'm sad that you can't hear. Sad that you can't. It always ends up to one thing, honey, when I look and you're not there. Around you, feel my arms around you, like sea around the shore.
So, I mean, you couldn't avoid a Cat Stevens album. I played it, heard the track. Sure enough, there's the string organ. I can easily hear my own picking style on there and all the rest of it. Flip it over, no credit, not a mention, nothing, nada. So I was pretty disappointed by that. About 2 years later, Steve by then was probably one of the biggest acts in the world. I mean, there was probably only 3 or 4 acts that could even have come close to his preeminence. There was a Radio 4 thing that he did, sort of career retrospective that he presented, and he mentioned me on this radio thing. So I felt a bit assuaged, because I thought, well, at least I wasn't I'd made a bit of a mark. Then he or his management phoned up and said he's doing a sort of career retrospective at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane and has asked for you to come along and play that instrument, the solo. So I took the Krivaczeck along and played the solo on how can I say, just the one track. But it wasn't until 2000 when they...
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a multi-million selling album.
Absolutely. I mean, it would have been a big tick on my CV had the credit been there. As it was, saying I played on that and not even knowing your name on the album, but everyone was going, yeah, right, you did, yeah, okay. You know.
Good dream, that man.
Yeah. So, but 30 years later, or the best part of, a remastered, sort of glammed up version of it came. Nice, lovely booklet and all the rest of it. And bless his heart, Samuel Smith rescued the whole situation by saying on the liner note, "This is my favourite of Steve's tracks, and here's the story." And he told it exactly as I've told it, because he was there when it all came along. And so I was finally, credited for the work, not paid. Though I received a penny for it before.
Oh, even after, did you not get anything for that session?
No, but I do now. It's my top. It's still my top track, but it's bigger than even Lily the Pink on PPL, when I get the monthly PPL, which is what you get, where you get a little tiny...
You are making money on it now?
Yeah.
No backtracking?
No.
Backtracking on
No. But, the main thing is the acknowledgement. I don't care about the money. It was just a funny story, really. But that was, that occurred in that. But it's very peripheral, because it's literally one session. Just a part of life's rich pattern. So then, 71, finished the Iain Matthews tour. Then I did a tour with Steel Ice Band, supporting them. I saw them at the Shrewsbury Festival in 2012, now I'm thinking. I think it was on the final Plainsong tour. And I had a lovely reunion with Matt. I was very close to Matt. I played on her first solo album, Woman in the Wings. That was year or two later, but I loved her. She was great. I used to go around to her flat. She cooks wonderful Japanese food.
Oh, really?
She does fantastic tempura. Anyway, I was the support act, so I did that. And on a few of those dates, and I did it with David Richards on bass for some of it, and then he dropped out because he went on tour with Sandy Denny. So I brought over from America this American guy called Bob Ronga, who had been the tour manager for the tour that we'd done with Iain and Richard Thompson and myself. And so Bobby came over because he was a bass player. And I just got on really well with him and loved him very much, and he played with me. So it was just me and a bass player all through that tour. And Iain started showing up to London dates backstage, and occasionally came on stage and sang the odd harmony with me and stuff like that. And somewhere towards the end of that tour, he kind of cornered me and said, look, he said, we're going really well, you know, I love working with you and all of that, you know, why don't we try out on maybe forming a band? How's about you, me, David and Bobby, you know, and see how we go. So that was the concept for Plainsong, and that was where that came about, which became the big thing that I did in '72. There'd been a little bit of the Scaffold amalgamating with the Bonzos thing. There were two shows earlier on in '71 that were both billed as Scaffold shows. One was Greenwich Town Hall, and the other one was in either Kettering or Corby in Northamptonshire. They were both Scaffold shows, but Viv and Neil had joined us, and I joined. And on one of them, the Greenwich one, Keith Moon played drums. I remember that on a funny little kiddie kit that Neil had brought from home, drum kit that one of his kids had, which Mooney proceeded to destroy.
Of course.
But yeah, so that was all going on in the background as well. But what we did was we proceeded with this idea. We didn't have the Plainsong name at that point, but the idea of being an acoustic four-piece band. And we went round to Ian's flat in he was living in Highgate then, on Shepherd Hill, and in the course of an afternoon we set ourselves a task. We said there's a wonderful record, the Tandin Alma song called Along Comes Mary, which the association had done, that is a really tricky song. It's got interesting chords, it rocks along, but it's a big vocal harmony workout as well, which was something we were aiming at. And we set ourselves the task, literally, of we will try and do a version of Along Comes Mary.
As sweet as a punch, sweet as a punch, sweet as a punch, sweet as a punch, sweet as a punch.
And if we're successful, then we'll be a band, and if we can't do it, then we're a failure and we won't be a band. That was the calculation that Iain and I made going into that afternoon. So we sat down, I boned up on how it went, and I think David, who was a terrific musician, that probably worked on it as well. And blow me, we got a really good version of it out that afternoon. It really rocked, it was solid. So then we called up Sandy Robertson, my manager, and said, Sandy, get up, you got to come to Highgate now. Yeah. So he came over and listened to it, and went, oh, bloody hell, that's fantastic, you know. So that was when the whole Plainsong concept came out. I think we even came up with a name that day by looking it up in the dictionary, just leafing through and seeing the word Plainsong and thinking, yeah, that's it, Plainsong. That's what we are, you know. And
it has religious connotations as well, doesn't it?
Not at all. Yeah, it does, but that wasn't
not
in our mind. No, yeah. So that was it, and then we started working as Plainsong, initially touring, Sandy working on it, but then Jack Holtzman from Electro Records started looking for Iain. His contract with Vertigo was the label with the spiral. His contract with Philips, who owned Vertigo, was up, and he'd done 2 albums. I think he owed them a third one. We did that in '72. Wonderful album called Journeys from Gospel Oak. But anyway, we were pretty free to move ahead into the Plainsong era. Viv was Iain was managed then by Ken Howard and Alan Blakely, who also managed Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, McNitich, and The Herd. They lived in Hampstead and had real pop background. They were songwriters themselves. But it was a bit of a misfit with Iain. I don't think they'd ever found it easy to work with him. So we went on tour. We started touring by the end of January in '72 as Plainsong, as an acoustic four-piece, but it took us a while to extricate Iain from his management contract with Ken and Alan, and then Sandy took over as the sole manager for the whole thing, and the deal with Elektra was signed pretty soon. In fact, we used Elektra money to buy out Iain's management contract, as I recall. And then we went in and did our first album, In Search of Amelia Earhart, which, our Amelia Earhart obsession stemmed from that year when I'd come across this book in Turret Books. It was a place where all the poets used to hang out in London. There's a wonderful man called Bernard Stone had a bookshop in Chelsea, and just off Kensington Church Street. It was called Turret Books, and we used to go there. There was always an open bottle of red at the end of the day, and people like Reginald Bosanquet used to be regulars, you know, or Frank Dickens, who was a cartoonist for the London Evening Standard, and a lot of poets, all the literati that were around. We'd go there and just socialise at the end of the day with Bernard. And browsing the shelves one day, I saw this book and I bought it. And it was a book about the conspiracy theory surrounding Amelia Earhart's last flight, and I lent it to Iain, and everybody in the band read it, and we kind of started writing that into the act. Iain wrote a song about it. I found an old song by this guy called Red River Dave, who was a radio cowboy from the 30s that he'd written about her disappearance, and this whole sort of little concept, little nuggety thing started working its way into the show, and then that was carried over into the album as we recorded the album.
Written by Jerry Esther and Judy Henske. It's a song called Raider. Raider stole the Morgan mare, stick as she was sly. She blackjack Raider's rubber heart and taught him how to fly. She blackjack Raider's rubber heart and taught him how to fly. Raider stole the Morgan mare, the guy she was sly. Raider sleeps out in the fields, Raider's growing old. In freezing winter, banks the fires to keep his mare from cold. In freezing winter, banks the fires to keep his mare from cold. Raider sleeps out in the fields, Raider's growing old. Raider, she cries, there's tears in your eyes. Oh, you're dreaming.
Our first album, and that was Plainsong. It didn't last long. It broke up at the end of '72. It's only 11 months and it was done and dusted. Iain moved out to the States, but musically we were very simpatico, but it was difficult, you know. Bobby drank to excess, and there were tensions in the band, but Iain had problems. He was a difficult person then. He's had a lot of therapy and he's a totally different person now. But it was difficult working with him then. I just kind of, I don't know. I stand by everything we did musically, you know. But I was leaning more towards American country. He was leaning more towards a sort of, I don't know, a more mellow, probably more mature version, sort of Americana thing. But anyway, he got offered a lot of money by Jack Holzman to go solo and move out to the States, so he took that. But it just sort of didn't matter to me because Grimm's had gone on the road during that year and I couldn't tour with them because of my commitment to Plainsong. But as soon as Plainsong split up, I was off and back with Grimm's. Yeah. Okay. So Grimm's came into focus there. I was still seeing a lot of Viv, obviously. And also, I was more and more committed to Jackie, who was my first wife. We married in May '73. Went on honeymoon to Jamaica for a month, wow. Which is that album which you brandish in front of me. This album is that's a picture that I took in Jamaica. That's me waiting for a bus in Jamaica. Nicholson's Wonder.
Time you're standing alone, all your friends have split to the country, feeling fine, all headed for speed. Things around are moving too slowly, down the line the living is fast. Ride that train to Energy Junction, fine, get moving to speed. Speedwell, show the way. Help me through today. Speedwell, pure as snow. Only friend I know. Speedwell, like a dream. Move me down
Nicholson's Wonder Store and Bar. That's my photograph. And that album is very largely about Jackie and the Jamaica experience. There's a lot of songs there, and Grimm's as well. We used to talk disparagingly about the Smoky Bacon Ramblers and all that stuff, you know. But it was Ian's fault. He would listen to everything. He absolutely voracious when it came to records, because the records were vinyl records. So he'd get all this stuff, and people would send it after he had a big success covering Joni Mitchell's Woodstock in 68 or 69.
I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road. When I asked him, where are you going? This he told me, I'm going down to Yasgur's farm. Think I'll join a rock and roll band. I'll camp out on the land. I'll try and set my soul free. We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden.
People would send him, every month he'd get, 50 albums, because people wanted him to cover their songs and turn them into a global #1 like he'd done with Woodstock. So when he didn't want stuff, he'd give it to me. So I'd listen to a lot of stuff. If he liked stuff as well, he'd play it to me, say, listen to this, So records that if you were an artist, record companies would just give you stuff out of the stock cupboard all the time. But he particularly he liked country music, but he'd listen to it once and give me the album. I never really seriously considered it, and I was hearing things for the first time when I came back from that. Again, back the Iain Matthews tour in '71, I came back home with 12 Jerry Lee Lewis albums, but not Great Balls of Fire Jerry Lee Lewis. She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye Jerry Lee Lewis. What's Made Milwaukee Famous Jerry Lee Lewis. I mean, great, absolutely drilled down, deep country music. And I loved it, and so did Richard Thompson. We were mega Jerry Lee fans. Stuff like that, but I'd never heard... I never really considered Marty Robbins and Merle Haggard. I got upset. He gave me a Merle Haggard Live in Muskogee, Oklahoma album. And I just loved it. I loved the tackiness of it, the unintentional humour. It's grotesque stuff, some of it, but it's brilliant. And musically, I love the sound of it. Some great guitarists. Roy Nichols, that played with Merle Haggard's Strangers, great guitarist. And so I became increasingly drawn to that, but Iain was not interested in that. For the right reasons, because he didn't think Brits should be aping Americans, and I understood that, but I was just, I love the sound of it, you know. So that was pulling us apart slightly. But anyway, none of that mattered, because he buggered off to America anyway, and I was off with Grimms, who didn't care if I was indulging in Americana, and Neil was up for that, you know, he liked all of that. So we did, I think we did Neil's first solo album then. I'd done some singles with him, Neil-inist, this is, for UA. We'd done Recycle Vinyl Blues, Lou Chucka Mau Mau, and Fluff on the Needle, and all those the great singles that he did for Andrew Lauder at United Artists. And then he did his first solo album, which was called How Sweet to Be an Idiot, that we did at Mike and Richard Vernon's studio in Chipping Norton. Had a wonderful time there with great musicians. Ollie Halsall, of course, the great Liverpool guitarist, who'd been with Pato, and Mike Kelly from Spooky Tooth playing drums. Wonderful drummer. Great. That was done in '73, I think. I think Grimms did a couple of tours that year. I had Urban Cowboy, my solo album. Then I did that album. That was also came out in '73. And then at the end of 1973, my old friend Peter James, who was the artistic director, had been until that year the artistic director at the Liverpool Everyman, got in touch with me and asked me to write a musical with Adrian Mitchell, who's another of the great. I haven't even mentioned Adrian. It's the poet that even the Liverpool poets looked up to. Fantastic socialist, brilliant. Heart on the Left. That was his starting point. You know, and he wrote the great poem, most people ignore most poetry because most poetry ignores most people. And he's right, you know. He had statements like that. I mean, he endeared him to us. Great poet. And he asked me to write a musical with him. So we wrote this musical together called Mind Your Head, which was produced very early in 1974 at the Shaw Theatre, which is on the Euston Road. And that really kind of opened another door to me, which was theatre, because that then went on tour, went to the Phoenix in Leicester and Nottingham Playhouse, and then I realised that you write for theatre and you don't even have to be there and it's earning money for you. You know, it's a whole other thing, because you're not on stage to ensure it happens. So that.
You were writing music which was recorded and played.
It wasn't recorded, it was played by a
band. Played by a band.
Yeah,
you weren't there because you were just writing the score.
Yeah, it was a score, that's exactly that. And then on the back of that, very soon after Mind Your Head, which was not, it sold, people went to it. It got very disparaging reviews in the Tory press because it was an Adrian Mitchell musical. It was a very much a left-wing socialist, dyed-in-the-wool, anti-Vietnam, all this stuff was coming out. Wonderful, wonderful piece. It was set on a number 24 bus. Act 1, Southend Green Hampstead to Pimlico. Act 2, Pimlico back to Southend Green Hampstead. And it was the set was a bus with the side cut off. It was a London Routemaster with the side cut off. The band sat in the luggage compartment. The actors got on and sat on the seats, upstairs, downstairs. There was a driver in the driving cab, all the rest of it. It was just fantastic. We cut this bus up and made a set out of the bus. And on the back of that...
bus, sorry. It wasn't a made-up bus, it was a
No, it's a
bus.
real bus. We just cut it up and shoved it in the theatre, welded it back together and made a set out of it. It was fantastic. What a wonderful thing. And it was basically Hamlet. Set on a number 22 bus.
I thought everything was basically Hamlet.
I'd had brilliant people in it. Had Linda LaPlante, who became Linda Marshall as she was, and then became Linda LaPlante. Brilliant people. I mean, Celia Mitchell, who's Adrian's partner, still with us, thank God. Adrian died years ago. What a loss. Bill Stewart. There was Norman Beaton, wonderful black actor. Just terrific people in it.
I remember Norman.
Nicky Henson, who was Leslie Henson's son, Nicky. Great leading man and fantastic singer was in it. I mean, you can find it I'm sure they'd be on Google, there'd be a cast list. Anyway, we did that. And that led me into television very quickly because Adrian had a half-hour drama called Something Down There Is Crying. And we did that with Elkie Brooks playing the lead. It was about a band doing a gig. So I did that. That got me into television. So, I mean, it was all doors opening. So, I mean, more experience. It was all these things. Every time these things have come up, I mean, you know, Pete James would say, I want you to write a musical. And there'd be a loud voice in the back of my hand saying in Adrian Henry's voice, don't be a Burke, you'll get a collar felt for that. You know, and I just... more than anything else, I was driven by, if you don't do it, you won't know. You'll never know whether you have the capability of doing it. You've got to do it. They've asked you, don't say no to anything. That's always been the guiding principle. And I got away with it, seat of the pants sometimes, but and it's forward motion all the time. The TV thing, not so much. I was just flattered to do it, and I loved it, really. So that started a TV career, which also carried on through the 70s. So that was 73, I wrote it, 74 it was produced. Grimm's carried on through 74 and 75. You've joined the Bonzo dog thing, the Doodah Diaries. The updated diary for 75, which Martin Stortman has produced, it has got loads of stuff about me working with Neil and Viv and Grimm's, and that, because that was the Bonzo related stuff that they were doing right through, so that helps. But by 75 I was also doing I did my first full-length television drama, which is a 1 hour slot, which was with Roger McGough. That was The Life Swappers. That was done for Thames Television. This wonderful piece that Roger wrote with Miriam Margolyes, Sheila Gish, Peter Egan, just great people, and a lovely score directed by Jimmy Goddard, who's a friend of Roger's, great designer and theatre and television director. He'd been a cameraman originally, but had a great time.
What were you doing in that?
Writing the music score.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the year that we did Maddie's Woman in the Wings album. I remember that session because John Gillespie, who played all over Maddie's album, American keyboard player, also played for me on. I remember him playing as part of the band for Life Swappers, which was the Thames Television thing. So I was spreading my wings in television terms, and still doing sessions and still gigging, mostly solo stuff of mine, or with Grimm's. And then 76, Roy Harper came knocking. And that was another big step in my life, because he'd toured, I'd seen him in 75, playing with Pink Floyd at Nebworth, when he was playing the songs from his album HQ, which was a great album, really good album, with a wonderful band. Bill Bruford on drums, David Cochran, this young American kid, on bass, and Chris Spedding on guitar. Then that album, just flip it open. I'm sitting there with the guitar. That guitar, which is in the room next door, that That guitar was bought brand new in 1962 by Chris Spedding. Not that he played it with Harper. I think by then he'd sold it. He sold it in '69, and I didn't know it at the time. But I bought that album that guitar in 1972. He sold it in '69. I bought it in '72, and I've owned it ever since. And it's in there. I love it as well. I saw Roy a couple of weeks ago. I had supper with him. He came down to Brighton, and the next night I played support with a local singer called Ed Mann. I played support to a gig by Nick Harper at the Brunswick here in Brighton, right. And I'd had supper with his dad, not 24 hours before. So that was a lovely 2 days. We were born on exactly the same day, but 5 years apart. Roy's exactly 5 years older than me, and we share a great bond. So anyway, he got in touch with me, and he wanted me to go out starting in America to tour that album, which I'd seen him playing with Chris Spedding on guitar the year before at Nebworth. I toured in '76 in America with Roy, and then we came back. It was not the happiest experience. Again, Roy suffered from the same thing as Liverpool seemed really, a bit too English. I mean, his great song, When an Old Cricketer Leaves the Crease, you're in America, boy, an old cricketer, what's that? And he was, I love Roy to death, but some of his stuff, the length of the numbers, it was all slightly out of kilter with the American audience. But when he came back to England, he immediately was on the phone saying, come down to the farm. He lived in Hereford. To me, he was on the phone, come down to the farm and let's record. And they got a mobile studio out from EMI, which might by then have been called Abbey Road, I don't know. With John Leckie producing and engineering. And we started recording an album called Bull in a Wing Vase, which was made at Roy's farm. And that started a whole different era. I then played with Roy for the best part of 5 years.
Blimey.
But we played as a band. Initially, when we first started touring, it was a 6-piece band. It's a live version in the studio of us playing Roy's kind of single, One of Those Days in England.
One of those days in England that you said could never end, as I was spaced out and living every chance. One of those days in England we'd been saving up to spend and buying rides on Mother Nature's funny belly dance. Baked beans and my coke. Please tell me when it matters, love. I might just wanna get out.